Baing Hun clapped the player on the shoulder, asking for his phone number, while the swordsman, who had hurried over, made the same request. Sangu called for attention and showed everyone the paralyzing dagger that had dropped as loot. Holding the dagger high, the swordsman grinned in delight at such a valuable reward. The leader of the detachment spoke up, reminding everyone that according to their contract, they needed to cast lots to divide the spoils. Placing a hand on the main character's shoulder, the tank smiled and asked if his friend wanted to claim the dagger. Frowning slightly, the man replied that the one who had done everything alone deserved such a reward, and that he would help his friend. Kneeling down, Jiku reflected that he couldn't ignore them after this. His confusion was clear in his eyes. Dio and Baing Hun sat side by side, laughing. After 5 years of guiding, the guy had learned to read people, but their behavior still seemed off. Across from them sat Sangu and a girl whose name he didn't know, both maintaining a calm demeanor, though there was clearly more to it. Beneath the surface, gathered in a circle, the detachment leader began the division of the spoils. The archer reached into his pocket, pulling out some bones. The swordsman and tank exchanged looks, and suddenly, the man leapt from his seat, a blade in his hands. Bing Hun swung it with a malicious smile, aiming straight for Sangu's heart. The main character reacted instantly, capturing the armed man's hand, stopping the assassination attempt. With a swift move, he threw the attacker over his back, pinning the tank to the ground. Clenching his teeth, the man realized that this was no longer just a game. If the player made a move, he would be ready to kill. At a distance, Dio hesitated when asked to act. The swordsman trembled, his eyes wide with fear, pinned helplessly to the ground. The young man recognized the situation as dangerous. A squad member could die. Looking up, he clarified that they weren't talking about the leader, but the tank. The girl, with fire in her eyes, held a dagger tightly in her hand. Lowering his eyebrows, the young man wondered if she wasn't a magician after all, and realized how risky this could be. The archer approached, weapon in hand, and the player remembered how Sangu hadn't even flinched when a knife had been pointed at him. Instead, he had calmly studied the blade. The squad leader and the girl turned to him when they heard the question about who they were really dealing with. The archer gave a faint smile and responded, "I was about to ask the same thing." Still gripping the squirming tank, the main character asked what they planned to do next. Dio, in a pathetic tone, cried out that he had no idea his friend would harm anyone. He had only been told to obey in exchange for a reward. Sangu asked why the question was directed specifically at him. Ju, sitting on the floor, calmly replied that he was the Ed party. The squad leader, deep in thought, placed a finger on his chin. Turning toward the girl, he called her by name. Harim, enveloped in a dark haze, quickly leaped back. The young man opened his mouth in surprise as the sorceress suddenly appeared beside Dio. The swordsman, groaning in pain, watched helplessly as the scene unfolded. The player thought to himself that he had been right all along. This girl was dangerous. Looking down, he saw Bing Hun's eyes empty from the intense pain. His body went limp, no longer resisting. The young man, still surprised that it worked, raised his right hand. Picking up the dagger from the floor, he declared that he would take it for himself. Sangu asked why the reward should go to him. The blade flashed in the young man's hands as he responded that he had saved their lives and deserved a reward. The squad leader disagreed, stating that it was an exaggeration. When he added that the item had no value to them, the archer visibly trembled. The player looked at him questioningly. Sangu, now observing the player, asked if he knew who he was dealing with. Looking back at the girl, the main character replied that she was clearly no ordinary person. He could tell that she needed such heavy protection. He didn't care about their personalities, pointing at Dio, and Bang Hun, he said he wouldn't bother with them since he was interested in hunting more. The red eye on the sword flashed, and Lao spoke, noting that Harim looked dangerous. Standing next to the squad member who lay on the ground, the young man mused aloud, wondering if he should run. The sword crackled with red lightning as Blue was surprised. Despite knowing they were dangerous, the player had asked them to handle the others and claimed the item for himself. A pop-up notification appeared indicating that the sword had absorbed the physical powers of zombies. Ju commented that he could now hunt as much as he wanted. He asked the sword how it felt. Ego replied that the blood of zombies was tasteless, transforming the sword into a ring. The player decided it was time to leave the dungeon. There were no more zombies left, and the blood they had absorbed was enough. Lu, having taken on the characteristics of the monsters he had defeated, had absorbed dexterity from goblins, strength from orcs, and physical power from zombies. The iron bars in front of the boss's room melted away, signaling that it was time to enter the reward room. Talon's lifeless body lay on the floor, the gateway to the reward room accessible through the fallen corpse of the gatekeeper. This room, typically reserved for the spoils of completing the dungeon, was now within reach. The young man was about to touch the boss's corpse when something caught his attention, a glow on the wall. He squinted, asking if it had been there before. Lu answered, stating it hadn't been, and after knocking on the stone wall where the light emanated from, the main character realized that it was hollow inside. Summoning his sword, he suggested breaking through the wall, and Ego agreed. With a single swing, the wall shattered, releasing a huge cloud of dust. Waving the dust away, Jiku asked what they wanted to tell him. Hearing the mention of Ego, he looked at the sword, noticing Lao's recognition of the presence of Ego. The player's surprise was evident as he asked if there was truly an Ego in a place like this. As the dust began to clear, a bright flash illuminated the room. The boss's chamber was now veiled in a thick cloud, and the young man couldn't help but wonder what he had been doing for the past 5 years if egomaniacal entities like this were so common in dungeons. Lao wanted to call his master foolish, but was interrupted as Ego suggested they search for an artifact. Covering his eyes with his hand, the young man tried to clear his throat, then lowered his hand and remarked that the gate was quite old, so it was unlikely anything of interest was hidden here. But Lu continued to insist. In the center of the room stood a white sword embedded in a stone. As the player approached, he called it Excalibur, his gaze fixed on the glowing weapon. Wondering if he should just take it, he reached for the hilt. The moment his hands touched the sword, the crystal embedded in it began to glow, casting a brilliant flash across the room. Ego's voice echoed, asking if the true owner stood before it. The young man opened his eyes, now in a pure white space. The sensations were strangely familiar. Looking around, he asked, "Is this voice coming from the Ego inside the sword?" The voice responded, stating that it had been waiting for its owner and wanted an answer to its question. A light haze appeared in the air, and Ju replied, "I'm not your master. Become one." The voice then requested a name. With furrowed brows and determination in his voice, the player declared, "I'll call you L." With the white sword now in his hands, the guy glanced at the blade, which sparkled in the light. For the second time, it felt slightly clearer, but before he could fully comprehend, a sudden rumble filled the room, and a terrifying realization struck him. The ceiling was collapsing. Stone slabs tumbled to the floor with a deafening roar. Ego urgently declared that they needed to escape, and the young man, covering his head with his hand, confirmed he already knew. Sensing each other's presence, the ring and sword seemed eager to introduce themselves, but the main character rushed out of the room, telling them both to stay quiet. When Lao tried to speak, the player seeing Talon's body in front of him, decided it was a good time to head to the reward room. As stone blocks continued to fall from the ceiling, the young man sprinted towards his next destination. The player furrowed his brows as something unexpected started happening. The floor beneath his feet began to crack and collapse. Ju reached out, his fingers brushing against the lifeless body of the boss, when a voice suddenly asked if the hunter wished to move to the reward room. A powerful wave of energy surged toward him, engulfed in a light haze. Before him, a massive orange eye with a long vertical pupil hung in the air. For reasons unknown, the continuous gates began to vanish. People began gathering where the dungeon entrance had once stood. The news anchor, dressed in a formal suit, reported that the emergence of an unusual gate and the mysterious incidents surrounding it were causing significant controversy. The main character mused that the gate must have disappeared shortly after he left. The reward for completing the dungeon was listed as 30 purple crystals and a blue guardian amulet. The amulet, while unable to cure his mother's illness, could prevent minor sicknesses and increase vitality. This would ease his financial worries, as the proceeds from selling the crystals could cover treatment costs. Back at the hospital, the children stood by the bedside of the woman who lay unconscious. At the entrance to the Players' Association, two enormous statues stood guard. Jiku began his ascent up the tower once more. With the citadel's development underway, an entire city had been built on the 5th floor, where no monsters resided. The crowds around him grew larger as he marveled at the progress. He had managed to overcome the 5th floor, only to find himself unconscious on the 6th. There, he had taken down the blue dragons with ease, and on the 7th floor, the goblins fell to a couple of swift sword swings. The dragons on the 8th floor were dispatched thanks to his lightning attacks. Now, standing on the 9th floor, surrounded by sharp rocks, he held two swords that sparkled in his hands. Just recently, such power had seemed like an impossible dream. An image of his smiling mentor, Soku, appeared in his mind, reminding him that level wasn't the only thing that mattered. Without turning around, Soku had once told him that his true abilities would reveal themselves if he didn't give up. The player smiled to himself, realizing how true those words had been. The rings on his hands began to shine. Looking at them, the young man felt satisfaction that Soku's level had also increased significantly, despite the division of experience points. He acknowledged that, thanks to the merger, he truly felt an increase in his own strength. His gaze drifted to the shining sword, and he thought about the demon sealed within it for so long. Perhaps that giant eye was connected to the demon. The stronger the ego, the stronger its owner. Looking at the information window for L, the main character decided he would seek out more egomaniacs. Lao, curious, asked where they would search. Grinning, Jiku replied that he knew the perfect place. The sun hung high in the sky above the auction building. People bid eagerly on the antique vase, which eventually sold for 170 million. Standing amidst the crowd, the young man asked if the egomaniacs could sense anything unusual. The rings replied that they didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. Raising an eyebrow, the player thought that made sense, as egos were rare. The auction host removed the canvas covering a glass cube and presented the final item, the bracelet of wounds, an item that dramatically increased recovery speed. The rings unanimously declared it to be an ego. The young man's mouth dropped open in surprise as the setting sun bathed the sky in orange. He walked down the street with his hands in his pockets, squinting in dissatisfaction. He thought the auction had been difficult and expensive. L responded, saying that the bracelet was the main item, while Lu cheekily called his owner a beggar. Million. Lu noticing his expression, remarked that it was strange, but the player simply smiled and said he needed to kiss Lou. Both Elle and Lou weren't particularly pleased with the suggestion. After leaving the store, the guy answered his phone, telling the caller he was heading home and had one problem. Holding the phone to his ear, he explained that finding a team was tough because the players behind the gate caused more trouble than the monsters. A scream from Tessic forced him to pull the phone away from his ear. The man on the other end of the line reminded him to be careful and not go beyond the gate. Standing at the pedestrian crossing, the young man noted that without equipment, he was stuck at the first level, which was why he couldn't rank as a player or formulate a solid strategy on his own. As the traffic light turned green, he said goodbye to his work colleague. The rare stars visible in the cloudy sky didn't go unnoticed, and the main character, still deep in thought, reminded his colleague to sign in for his promotion. Looking down, he considered that, although he wasn't opposed to advancing through the tower, Elle still needed blood, and progress was moving too slowly. He climbed the stairs, thinking that substantial income awaited him behind the gate. Sighing with relief, he hoped everything would work out since urgent matters had already been resolved. Raising the package in front of him, Ju grinned, proudly announcing that he had successfully bought beef. Elle called his owner simple-minded for holding so much money in his hands, calling it stinginess. A street lamp illuminated the road ahead as Lao apologized for his insolence. The young man, determined, thought to himself that at all costs he wanted to earn enough money to leave this place so Eugen could walk safer paths. The young man climbed the stairs when something caught his attention, a small flash hanging in the air. In the next instant, it began to grow, releasing energy in all directions. A new gate appeared right in the middle of the street. The inscription above it posed the question, "Do when the gate appears." A drawing of 2 circles and a smiling girl accompanied the text, which explained that immediately after the gate's manifestation, it posed no danger, but it was advisable to call 112 or the association and remain where you were. A red circle with a line through it was clearly visible, warning that entering an unknown level, gate without confirmation from the association was dangerous. The text stated that a player who entered the gate without approval could face up to 5 years in prison or a fine of up to 10 million won. A drawing of a man holding a phone showed that if additional witnesses appeared before the gate's location was confirmed by the association, disputes could arise. The first person to find the gate and provide evidence would be granted priority to attack the gate, with the right to resell it. Inside the gate management department, Testchik sat at a computer wearing a white shirt. Clicking his mouse, he picked up a pink mug and asked if the gate was near Ju's house. The technician brought the mug to his mouth, looking at the applicant's name. Suddenly, he choked, spilling coffee all over his face. The office workers turned as Tessic loudly shouted the main character's name. A man in a black jacket was seen. Someone commented that if the gate wasn't entered within 5 days, the priority to attack might go up for auction. The black-haired man, smiling, also reminded them to consider all the precautions he had discussed earlier. Testchik turned when he saw his boss approach and praised his subordinate for his work. Barriers stood before the shining portal, and Tessic told Ju that he wanted to speak with him at the cafe. On the building's exterior, a white cup and 3 yellow leaves were depicted. The glass was filled with iced coffee. The technician took a sip, then threw his head back, finishing the drink. He abruptly set it down on the table next to his ID. Jayu smiled when the boss asked if he was confident in his abilities. The young man replied that he had become much stronger than he had anticipated. The technician leaned his head on his hand, saying that all he knew was that the main character was very stubborn. He then asked what floor Ju was on now. The ceiling above them showed signs of scratches, and the light was dim. Ju answered, "I'm on the 11th floor." The protagonist's eyes widened in surprise when the boss mentioned that only 4 days remained. With a serious expression, the technician explained that Jayu needed to prepare everything within those 4 days and then report back to him. Multicolored tapestries adorned the walls, as the boss added that he wanted to see if it would be possible to send Ju there, but if he wasn't adequately prepared, he wouldn't let him go anywhere. 4 days later, a gun rack was visible in the basement of the department, located within the training room. In the department's basement, Jiku looked up, realizing that the walls were reinforced with a protective layer. He had clearly underestimated the association. With his hands in his pockets, he stared perplexedly at his interlocutor, who asked if he liked the offer to join the association. Tesik raised his hand, adding that Jiku could now join as a non-employee. Character declined. Scratching his head, Jiku explained that he wasn't ready to commit just yet. He remembered Theo's face and added that as soon as Tesik became chief, the conductor department had been eliminated. Tesik rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscular arms with visible veins, and replied that Theo had joined the Carbon Guild and seemed to have become a different person. Jiku asked if Tesik had brought a weapon for training. The technician scratched his face with a finger and smirked, saying that Jiku had underestimated him if he thought he only worked in that office. Tesik winked and waved his fist, and Jiku stood still, hands still in his pockets. Suddenly, his eyes widened and his mouth dropped open in shock. The main character instinctively covered his face with his hands to protect himself, his face becoming drenched in sweat from fear. Tesik, with a confident look, said he was still in top form and that Jiku shouldn't look down on him, the top ranker. Raising his hands, a dark aura surrounded Tesik and he told Jiku to attack. Jiku pulled his hand from his pocket, thinking that he couldn't defeat Tesik, but wasn't about to just stand there either. Suddenly, his amber eyes widened as a foot in a leather shoe appeared, aimed directly at his head. A powerful explosion thundered in front of him. Jiku swiftly drew his weapon, gritting his teeth in tension as his foot slid across the floor. Tesik bent one knee and Jiku jumped back, still holding his sword. The technician eyed Jiku skeptically and asked if he had properly prepared. The main character, still processing the speed and power of the top rankers, thought that they were on a completely different level. Tesik frowned and shouted at Jiku to pull himself together, warning that if he was distracted, he would die immediately. Behind the gate, Jiku wiped a drop of sweat from his cheek and grimaced, realizing that Tesik was right. He had been too arrogant, but he clenched his teeth, determined not to back down. However, I didn't come empty-handed, he thought. 4 days earlier, the game items market in Dongyun came into view, with tall buildings and cars. Driving along the streets, Jiku held his phone to his ear, pretending to talk. But in reality, he was explaining to Elle that his equipment was too weak. The main character glanced to the side, adding that he couldn't even walk around with such basic gear. He suggested that perhaps he could find the ego and that he would inform the owner if it appeared. The sun was shining brightly against a blue sky as Jiku passed by a combat equipment store. Through the glass, he saw metal armor marked as normal grade, which increased defensive power by 9. Behind the glass mannequins, various military uniforms were on display, tempting him with the prospect of better equipment for his journey ahead. The main character's eyes widened in horror as he looked at the price tag. A bright green screen appeared in front of him, displaying information about the leather armor. The price? Over 1,000,000,000 won. Jiu sat down on a nearby bench, his gaze dropping as he sighed. There were highlights in his black hair, and he muttered to himself, "Cheap is too bad and good is too expensive." He turned around when he heard Ellen Lowe calling out to him. In the middle of the crowd, a child wearing a yellow t-shirt stood out. The boy, missing a tooth, shouted angrily that his grandfather was a great master. Someone from the crowd asked, What's so great about equipment that doesn't even have information about the item? The boy walked away, grumbling that his grandfather was doing really well. A man in the crowd commented that there was no point in advertising a store where there was no real trade. The boy frowned in frustration. Ju approached him, calling out, and the child turned around, eyes widening in surprise. Jayu nodded with a smile and asked if the boy could take him to his grandfather's store. The boy grinned and eagerly agreed. They walked along the stairs, heading to a darker part of the building. Ju silently watched them. Boy still unsure, but Lo and El reassured him that everything was fine. Ju looked at the boy's yellow t-shirt again, and the spirits commented that even his clothes were an ego. The boy opened a door with a wide smile and announced to his grandfather that he had brought a visitor. The old man's voice rang out, confirming that the boy had ego power, albeit artificial. Ju entered the room with the equipment and was immediately struck by surprise. The shelves were lined with various items, boots, chainmail, and a hoodie, each nameless and of varying levels. Another shelf held a mitten. El explained that these were egomaniac items that lacked their own unique abilities. Ju stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes scanning the many green screens of item information. He closed his mouth as a gray-haired man approached, noting that there were no suitable items for Jiu because he wouldn't understand their value anyway. The man told him to leave. An elderly man with pumped-up arms, presumably the grandfather, flipped through a book and muttered that he was tired of dealing with people who had veils over their eyes. The old man looked up in confusion when Jiu declared that he would buy his goods. The elderly man closed. His eyes waved a dismissive hand and replied that he didn't sell to people who didn't even know how to use the equipment. Ju approached a wooden shelf, asking if the blacksmith would sell him the goods if he could, prove he could use them. The old man, still sitting at the table, crossed his arms and looked at Ju in surprise as he began to name the characteristics of one of the weapons. The main character turned around as the blacksmith stood up, a sudden intensity in his voice. He asked loudly, "Can I see the abilities of this sword?" The main character calmly confirmed his intention, locking eyes with Dick, the blacksmith. Dick smiled and replied that the blacksmith's greatest desire was to allow someone who understood the value of the weapon to wield it. Jiku ran his hand along the blade of his sword, then raised it with a confident look. "I'll call it point," he declared. Dick's mouth opened in shock, his eyebrows shooting up. Minsu, standing beside him, widened his eyes and froze. Jiku stood frozen with his sword raised, while both men stared at him in disbelief. Around them, various weapons lined the blue-tiled room. Jiku and Tessek now stood opposite each other, the main character's eyes glowing with red light. As smoke rose around him, he moved toward the technician so quickly that two bright streaks of light followed his path. Tessek remained motionless, watching as Jiku leapt and swung his sword. The young man clenched his teeth and frowned as the chief repelled his attack with a single motion of his hand. Wrinkles appeared on Tessek's face, and he raised his palm, shouting that he had seen vibrations at the edge of Jiku's sword. He advised that the main character use all his strength and aim for the vital organs. Jiku bent his knees, holding two swords in his hands. He thought to himself that his opponent had been a former top ranker. His bangs covered his face, and the main character realized that he needed to concentrate. He swung his sword, but Tessek deftly dodged the attack. The main character tried again, but Tessek easily evaded it. Suddenly, Tessek found himself behind Jik, raising his hand to strike. Jiku swung his sword, leaving a red trail in the air, and crouched down. To avoid another attack, Jiku circled around the boss, striking with both swords, forcing the chief to jump back. They moved rapidly around the training field, never stopping their combat. But then Jiku frowned, glanced away, momentarily distracted. Tessek clenched his hand into a fist as he closed them. Distance. Jiku looked at the clothes on the shelf, not understanding why he couldn't make the connection. The main character reached for a stack of items, and Lu explained that these were second-rate equipment. Jiku turned away, saying he would try one last time. Lu advised him to stop his voice tired. But the main character, with a weary face, touched the equipment, named it Bernard. A bright flash erupted as the system notified him that a connection with the ego was possible. Jiku smiled joyfully as he looked at the glowing light. The system then reported that he lacked the ability to communicate as a partner, preventing him from using all of the ego's abilities. It further informed him that most of Bernard's abilities had been lost. The characteristics of the item were displayed on the green screen. The man clenched his hand into a fist, surrounded by blinding light. Tessic frowned, tense, and clenched his teeth as the air thickened with anticipation. Suddenly, an explosion rang out, and the main character was thrown back, crashing into the wall. Jiku gasped in pain, coughing violently as he fell to the floor. A large hole was visible in the wall behind him. He rested his elbows on the ground, groaning. Something orange flashed in front of him, and he looked up to see many bottles scattered across the floor. As an orange bottle rolled toward him, Tessic told Jiku to drink it to heal his internal injuries. The main character sat up and, with a smile, asked, "Why is such an expensive potion in such a cheap bottle?" Jiku raised his eyebrows when the boss spoke, clearly impressed. Tessic, with a satisfied expression, added that he hadn't expected Jiku to actually be able to scratch him. He recalled the moment when Jiku had frowned and gritted his teeth, realizing that it wasn't an accident. It was a well-thought-out plan. Tessic remembered Jiku's grin and came to the conclusion that he had definitely underestimated him. Jiku wiped his face with his fists, and the boss asked what was wrong. With a grin, Jiku closed his eyes and explained that those were his items. A bright portal shimmered before them. Tessic then said that the association would send agents to clear the gates if they weren't dealt with within a week from today. His expression turned serious as he added that he was giving Jiku 5 days to take care of it. If Jiku didn't come out, he would go in himself and get him out without the help of agents. Jiku's face turned alarmed as he quickly replied that it wouldn't be necessary. Tessic explained that it was cheaper than paying the association's employees. They approached the glowing gate, and the boss warned Jiku not to relax, even though it was an F-rank gate. With a smile, Jiku thought to himself that Tessic sounded almost like a father worrying about him. Turning to face the portal, Jiku said he was going in, and the boss waved at him with a smile. Stepping through the bright gate, Jiku found himself in a dark room. He hoped it was a continuous gate. Moving forward, he explained to L that this way he could make more money. He glanced to the side, and L asked how to tell if the gate was continuous. The main character replied that they first needed to clear it. A shadow fell across his face, and he added that he could finish it quickly as long as it wasn't a complex type of tower dungeon or labyrinth. Jiku drew his sword and, with deft movements, attacked a wolf that jumped at him. The blade entered its mouth, and a red light began to glow from within. Leaning down, he swung his sword again, taking out more wolves. Turning to L, he said, "Stop talking." A pack of wolves with glowing red eyes emerged from the shadows. Jiku grinned and said, "It's time to level up." The predators bared their teeth aggressively. The system reported that Lu was absorbing the blood of the blue wolves. Jiku, now wielding 2 swords, attacked the wolves with swift strikes. The system notified him of an increase in L's level. The main character gritted his teeth as one of the wolves lunged at him. With a grin, he summoned Run Hard and deflected the accumulated damage, causing a small explosion near the predator's mouth. The room was illuminated by a series of flashes as the system continuously updated Lo's characteristics. Jiku, panting slightly, sat down on the ground and suggested they take a break. He glanced at his watch and noted that about 5 hours had passed. Purple crystals were scattered across the ground, a sign of their successful progress. The main character noted that the enemies were not much different from orcs, probably because they were F rank. He shoved some food into his mouth, commenting that, given his situation, it was difficult to get here alone. But he had been lucky this time. Jiku tore off a piece of the food and added that what he really needed was to raise his player level. He imagined a person with an oxygen mask Thinking about how measuring a player's level could be done without any equipment. If the ego was at a certain distance, Jiku's level would still be 1, meaning he wouldn't even be able to get a proper rating. He glanced at Tessik, who was scratching his ear, and explained that the boss couldn't really help him with that. Taking a sip from his flask, Jiku hinting that if he could develop his abilities, he'd be able to establish communication at any distance. L, hearing this, spoke about the ego holder. Jiku then slapped the ring in his hand, which caused the spirit to cry out in protest. The ring, shaped like a snake, began to smoke. Jiku reached into his backpack, commenting that he wasn't sure about development, but he still didn't fully understand it. Looking at the blue screen with L's information, he saw that the skill cannibalism was listed. He raised his hand to his face and asked, "Does this mean eating my own kind?" Lu, alarmed, asked if Jiku had gone crazy. Jiku smiled and reassured him that he was only joking. Standing up, he grabbed his backpack and declared that he had rested enough. It was time to move on. Jiku opened a bag filled with purple crystals, thinking that he should buy a backpack with space expansion magic soon. But then, a look of surprise crossed his face. He glanced at the small, colorful bottles in his bag and saw a strengthening potion that could be used to create a little more space. He picked up one of the bottles, saying to himself, "Just need a buff." The air around them started to steam, and El remarked that the boss must be nearby, sensing the strongest aura in the gate. Jiku drank the potion and confirmed that he knew this, which was why he used buffs. As they walked through the dark cave, Jiku asked how much longer they had to go. His face turned worried as he realized the potion's effect would soon wear off. El, sensing something, said that he felt a strong energy nearby. The main character turned around, and El confirmed that they were almost there. Jiku agreed, saying that El was right, to which Lu replied, "I'm the one who said it." Jiku placed his hand to his mouth and whispered for Lu to be quiet. Lao responded that no one could hear them anyway. Jiku glanced away, then told Lao not to be rude to his owner. As they walked, the blue sky began to appear, and Jiku had the feeling that the boss had absorbed half of the gate's power. Ahead of them, a high rock stood, and Jiku thought to himself that this enemy felt different from Talon, whom he had fought countless times before. At the base of the rock, a gray wolf lay, sleeping on the ground. Suddenly, the predator opened its red eyes, locking its gaze on Jiku. He stood tall, his fur shimmering in the light, a wide grin spreading across the massive wolf's face. He was the guardian of the gate. Jiu gripped his swords, while BL remarked that the enemy was formidable, and L cautioned the owner to be careful. The main character clenched his teeth, feeling the immense pressure, which was far more intense than anything Talon had ever exerted. The wolf leaped into the air, and a noticeable depression appeared in the ground beneath him as the predator rushed toward Jiu. The main character crossed his swords, furrowing his thin brows. The wolf bared its teeth and opened its mouth wide, but Jiu quickly used his weapon to shield himself. He then retreated, tightening his grip on the white sword. Jiu struck, landing several blows on the enemy. The sword sank deep into the wolf's body, blood pouring from the wound. However, Jiu realized the injury wasn't as deep as it seemed. Dark splashes of blood flew through the air as he frowned, sensing the danger. The wolf's eyes glowed with fury as it growled, bending down to remove the sword from its body. Jiu stared in shock as the wolf tossed him aside. He crashed into the ground, rolling and slamming into a wall with a powerful explosion. Despite the impact, the main character managed to stay on his feet, his swords pressed into the ground. The weapons began to smoke, and Jiu grimaced, recognizing that the wolf's attacks were stronger than he had anticipated. He decided to endure and accumulate the damage, a smirk crossing his face. The wolf bared its teeth, wrinkling its nose in irritation. Jiu, recalling his battle with the goblin, compared this protracted struggle to the challenge of facing a difficult foe. His backpack fell to the ground as he leapt high into the air, confident in his skill. An explosion erupted, sending dust into the air. Ju gritted his teeth, turning to face the wolf. The beast opened its mouth, steam billowing from within, before charging toward Ju. He crossed his swords, frowning, as he prepared to defend against the sharp fangs. The black sword struck the wolf's eye, and Ju's face tightened in focus. The wolf's right eye socket turned black from the blow, and Ju continued to strike with precision. The white and black swords crossed in his hands as the wolf let out a roar, saliva dripping from its mouth, staining everything around it. Above, the bright sky stretched over the rocky landscape. Eventually, the predator collapsed to the ground, and Ju, breathing heavily, sat beside him. He glanced at the wolf and muttered that the effect of the enhancement potion was wearing off, and without Brunard, this battle would be even harder. The wolf glared at him, still defiant. Ju added that Talon was no match for this beast. With a final motion, Ju drew his black sword and silently thanked the wolf for ultimately falling by his hand. Dark blood sprayed from the wound, and the system's voice echoed, reporting the enemy's defeat and the experience points gained. Meanwhile, L was absorbing the wolf's blood. The black sword began to glow brightly, and the system announced that L had gained a bonus to agility and unlocked a new skill. The screen displayed a description of the skill: a rapid recovery of physical strength when taking serious damage. The skill cannibalism had been activated. Ju, surrounded by a flurry of system notifications, stared in shock. Drops of blood dripped onto the green grass as dark red liquid poured endlessly from the predator's body. Horror flashed across the protagonist's face as he gripped his sword and watched the creature's body burn. A large red stain spread out across the ground. The system reported that L had absorbed the wolf, and that the predator had successfully transformed into an ego. A dark stone floated in the air. Ju sat down on the ground, taking the crystal into his hands. "I've never heard of a monster transforming into an ego before," L said. The main character glanced at his white sword, and L admitted that he wasn't aware of this phenomenon either. Ju raised his hand to his face, lost in thought. He turned his attention to the black sword and asked, "Did L inherit the wolf's ego?" "No," L answered. Ju turned away, trying to make sense of it all. He opened his information window, scanning through the details of his acquired egos. To his surprise, he saw the name of the wolf among them. His eyes widened, and he gasped. He realized he should have shouted out the name of the skill earlier. He recalled the moment when he had covered his eyes with one hand and screamed in frustration. Looking to his right, he saw white clouds floating in the sky. He decided he would test the skill later. Standing up, Ju decided to assess how useful the cannibalism skill was. With a grin, he added that he had also obtained a blue crystal, its value far surpassing that of purple tier 1s. He began walking toward the reward room, but stopped abruptly, panic creeping in. The spirits didn't seem to understand what was happening. Then, the memory of the beheaded enemy came to him. "To enter the reward room, I need to touch the body of the gatekeeper," he murmured. Raising his hand, Ju shouted, but the wolf's body was eaten by L. He gazed at the bright sky, his mind racing. Inside the gate, where the sun never set, an intensified search had begun. On the second day, while Ju was examining a tree, L remarked that they were wasting time. L suggested leaving and seeking help. Ju turned around, shaking his head. "I can't do that. If I leave now, everyone will start suspecting me if anything strange happens again, like last time at the Giri Gates." His gaze shifted to the rocks ahead. "If I leave here, I'm sure I won't find any other way." Suddenly, a purple glow emanated from the portal. Ju's expression grew serious. "If the gate ruptures, it could harm people. I have to find a way to resolve this situation no matter what. Ju smiled when L praised his sense of responsibility. He closed his eyes and explained that Tesk would arrive in 4 days, adding with a grin that he could avoid the worst-case scenario. However, he knew it would be better to resolve things before the boss arrived. It was the 3rd day. A backpack stood by a tree. Ju scanned the area, but found nothing. He ate a piece of candy, musing aloud if it was worth it to destroy all the other monsters. The spirits responded that they supported this decision. The main character then attacked the wolves with his swords, making his way through caves they'd intentionally skipped before, wiping out all remaining enemies. By day 5, the atmosphere was tense. Bright red lightning cracked through the sky. The final wolf fell, blood gushing from its body. Ju stood over it and said, "This is the last one." As the monster's body began to smoke, Ju scratched his neck, pondering what to do next. "Tusk will be here soon," he muttered. He looked around, considering the possibility of destroying the cave, when the spirit suddenly called his attention. Surprised, Ju widened his eyes as a brilliant golden glow appeared, signaling that all the energy within the gate was converging in one spot. He furrowed his brows and demanded, "Where is this place?" The spirits replied that it was where the gatekeeper had been. Outside, a colorful sunset bathed tall buildings in light. The hum of an expensive soundproofing barrier generator buzzed from a nearby gray building. Tesk, now visible, commented that he would have entered if Ju had come out an hour or two later. Inside, water flowed in the shower as Tesk asked why Ju had taken so long. He had expected Ju to master his abilities in just 2 days. They were both washing up in adjacent stalls. Ju, shampooing his hair, explained, "I destroyed the keeper that same day. But then a small problem came up." The technician, holding a bar of soap and a washcloth, raised an eyebrow, asking what the problem might be. Ju continued, "The wolf's body disappeared, so I couldn't enter the reward room." He glanced to the side, adding, "I ended up clearing all the remaining monsters." Tesk, recalling Ju's bag of crystals, began to understand why there were so many of them. "The moment I killed the last wolf," Ju explained, "all the energy inside the gate started to gather in the boss room." In the cave, stalagmites hung from the ceiling as Blau shouted for Ju to hurry. Ju, frustration evident on his face, snapped back, "I'm hurrying and no more reminders from the spirits." The cave ahead shone with a bright golden light so dazzling that nothing else was visible. Ju dashed toward the light, his mouth open in awe. Suddenly, his eyes widened in shock as he saw fragments of what seemed to be a world coalescing in one place. Tesk's voice echoed, explaining, "It's like pieces of the world are gathering here." Ju watched the glow of yellow and blue, a golden flash igniting in front of him. He extended his hands toward it, excitement lighting up his face. The system reported receiving ego fragments and asked Ju if he wanted to enter the reward room. Meanwhile, water droplets fell from the shower as the technician, his face wet, asked what it all meant. The main character stayed silent, looking down. The boss opened his mouth in surprise when Ju suggested that the gate might be the ego. Small puddles gathered on the floor as the statue appeared, and the system announced that Jayu would be transferred that payment for the crystals and the gate clearing to his account. In total, it amounted to about 50 million won. He thanked the men and left the building. Tesk then asked if Jayu was planning to go to the hospital. Ju responded that he had called the girl and that she was probably very worried, so he needed to visit her. As they reached the parking lot, Tesk unlocked his car and offered Ju a lift. However, Ju declined, saying he wasn't interested. Tesk smiled awkwardly, asking what was wrong with his car. He went on to talk about what a real man should have. As the car sped down the road, Tesk continued, explaining that all men aspire to have a car like his. Ju sat awkwardly, looking away, trying to hide his smile. Tesk declared that this was the dream of every real man as the car raced forward. A number 1. The room door was visible when the conversation shifted to the topic of Jayu's injuries. The doctor stated that there were no injuries, so everything was fine. He then requested to buy a drink for Yuang to help wake her up. The girl, rubbing her eyes, smiled and thanked Ju for taking care of her. Ju replied that he was the one who had received the help. As they walked down the corridor, Yang yawned. When Ju asked why she was so sleepy, she explained that she had just had dinner. He stretched and mentioned that exams were coming up. Yuang smiled, claiming she'd only had a short nap, but now needed to study again. Ju warned her not to overdo it, as it could affect her health. She jokingly said he could buy her a guardian amulet. A grandmother, holding an iron ring in her hand, asked if Ju was Yuang's older brother. She approached them, and Yuang asked if the woman was still asleep. The grandmother replied that she had decided to take a walk and heard their voices. She suddenly looked away and took Ju's hand, commenting that she was curious about how well-mannered Yuang was. She smiled, squeezing his hand, and told him he had a very good aura. Ju thanked her as they both bowed. The grandmother apologized for interrupting their walk, but reminded them to be careful and that they would meet again tomorrow. As the grandmother started to leave, she suddenly turned around, addressing Jayu. He looked at her in confusion, and she warned him that several energies had collided within him. She told him to be cautious, not to lose himself, and wished him the strength to overcome all obstacles. Jayu and Yuang exchanged a puzzled glance, wondering what she meant. Ju stared at his hand as if searching for answers. The next day, in the hospital, Ju stretched, realizing that he had slept well far better than in the damp cave. It felt more like a real hotel. Suddenly, he noticed a man entering the room. It was the doctor, who asked if Jayu was related to Shugen's patient. Jayu confirmed this, but he was puzzled. The doctor then asked if Jayu had some time, as he seemed to have a serious case on his hands. A stone statue with a weapon appeared on screen, and a crowd of people gathered around a portal. Ju observed the doctor and noted that 3 days had passed, and it was time to head home. He offered to wash up and have a drink, suggesting they get some beer. But the doctor suddenly asked if Jiyu was fond of vodka. He then smiled, explaining that he was a fan of the serial killer and wanted to say hello. Ju, surprised, lowered his head, biting his lip, as he wondered what had just happened. Meanwhile, the conversation between Jayu and the doctor continued. The doctor informed him that the patient's condition was critical. Although it wasn't immediately obvious, the muscles were severely damaged. Ju remained silent, walking forward, his mind occupied. The scene shifted to a woman lying in bed. The doctor explained that she had serious complications. It seemed that Ju had taken good care of her, but unfortunately, it had been too late. Suddenly, evil-minded monsters appeared in front of Jayu. The doctor revealed that there was another problem, the cause of which was still unknown. Ju, now fearful, asked what the problem was. The doctor could only say that they didn't have much information. It was reported that the woman had about a year to live, or at worst, only about 3 months. Ju's face darkened with determination and frustration. His jaw clenched as he rushed toward the monsters, thinking to himself that it was all his fault. A door was shown, and Ju thought about how, if only he hadn't hesitated, hiding behind his family, if he had gathered the courage sooner, things might have been different. He suddenly jumped from his seat, contemplating what might have happened if he had gained strength faster. That's all for now, folks. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for quality recaps. Check out the comment section to watch the next part.